Good morning, everyone. Congratulations on getting up this morning. I know everybody was out last night having a wonderful time in San Francisco, and I think you made a wise choice because you're in for a real treat this morning. So we'll go ahead and get this session started. I'd like to introduce John Volker. He's a professor at the College of Business at Austin Peay State University.
And good morning. I am from Austin Peay, and that's in the South, and we testify a lot in the South. So I've noticed the interactions with Jeff, and I thought he doesn't really need an introduction here in a standard sense. So I'm kind of going to tell you my experience with him and why I'm so very impressed with him every time I see his name. His students call him Stamp. I call him inspirational. And I first saw him at the Oklahoma State University Experiential Workshop. My first contact with him was, there's this guy that's going to talk about creativity for 2 hours. And I thought, oh dear God, 2 hours of theory. You know, Jeff exploded into the room, and in what seemed like 10 minutes, the 2 hours were over, and quite frankly, my life had changed. I had a completely different opinion of creativity in the classroom, a completely different opinion of creativity in the College of Business, and I became an advocate for creativity classes in colleges of business, and was successful in getting one in my own College of Business. A few months later, after that, my dean came to me and said, here's some money, do something entrepreneurial, which all of you experience. They have absolutely no idea what it is that we do. And I said, well, sure, you know, I'll take the money. And I thought, what in the world can I do that would be very, very cool? And I thought about Jeff Stamp. So I called his company, Bold Thinking, and his answering machine says, hey, make me smile and I'll call you back. And I said, well, Jeff, I've got $10,000 to spend on you. And I got a call back the next day. So I asked him what he needed, and he said, I need to be busy all day. I said, we can do that. He taught 2 classes for us. He taught an all-campus presentation on creativity, and then he did a special workshop for us for some invited small business owners that we had singled out as fairly progressive in the community. We got nothing but rave reviews from students, faculty, and the business community about him. I was a hero, the dean was happy, life was very, very good. So I highly recommend Jeff. And again, he changed some people there about creativity. Some of our students, he piqued an interest that they followed up on. Jeff has 2 PhDs, one in mathematics, one in food science. He's a professor of entrepreneurship, an entrepreneur in residence at the University of North Dakota, and he is a docent of branding and creativity at Abu Academy in Turku, Finland, which I think is rather impressive. The thing that I love most about him is he's responsible for baked lays. I just love that, the baked chips. But he's developed and sold several companies. I would consider him a serial entrepreneur. He has now a company called Bold Thinking, which he's using, I think, to complete his mission and fulfill his passion, and that's of sharing his love of creativity. And it's infectious. I've caught that bug. I hope I'm never cured from it. And with that, I give you Jeff Stamp and probably an hour of excitement at the very minimum.
Thank you. Well, good morning, USASBE. Well, for those of you who haven't heard me speak before, I am absolutely thrilled to be here with you. And for those of you who have, let them know what's about to happen, because you didn't get here on a Saturday morning by accident. And I'm really excited to put you to work, because you do know at least if one thing's going to happen, we're going to do something. And I'm a real big fan of making faculty members do what they came to a conference to do, and that is to learn to be entrepreneurial. You up for that? So which table is the most creative? See, I love it. You have no clue what you're going to do, and there's already the trash talking is happening. So for these kinds of people, I have entitled my talk Nit-Nits, okay? The Nit-Nit is you're doing it backwards. And if you think about it, and if you look at that word closely, you'll see what I'm trying to make a play on. But the fact of the matter is that when we try to incite and ignite creativity in students in entrepreneurship, we tend to do it backwards. We tend to do it in some very pedantic ways that are very old school in the educational process. And so I want to flip that around and show you some things that are very important in the process of getting students to learn to experience entrepreneurship in a very short period of time. And I'm a big believer that the aha moments of life can be scripted, that they can be purposefully found. Serendipity to me is not a happy accident. It's a purposeful event that you embrace and have a lot of fun experiencing, and you play. And so a big part of that is very important to me. I was very thrilled that Tom Cooney, who was here from Ireland, is he here this morning? Did he make it to the session this morning? I was very impressed. I about jumped up out of my chair when he talked about that entrepreneurship has, yes, the business aspects, that you do in fact start a business, that there's a social aspect, that you really do try to solve social problems. But there is also a personal effect of entrepreneurship, and that's a big part of what my company does. I have thousands of entrepreneurs in companies where we actually help them think more entrepreneurially. Most of their bosses are afraid they're going to leave and start a new company, and I explain to them that what really everybody wants is someone who understands how to think more entrepreneurially. So today I want to show you a little technique that I've been asked, and my email address is up here on the slide. I want you to make sure that you write it down, because professors all over the world love to call me and say, oh my gosh, I didn't pay attention to what your address was because I want you to create an exercise for my class. I'm more than happy to address anybody's needs to figure out what works for your students. And I've been all over the world and worked in 38 countries helping people become more creative. And of course, I've never found in any one of those 38 countries a group of people who couldn't kill a good idea. It seems to be like a highly honed human talent. So if you're here this morning, it's because you're looking for something. And if you're like most people that come to a conference, you all started from the same entrepreneurial point of view. You realize that you have an idea for something, and you're here at this conference looking for it. As a matter of fact, you're here on a mission to try to figure out what it is you're going to do with the stuff that you learn here. Because you perceive that here is a place where information is going to be available to you that's going to become an opportunity for use in your marketplace, right? Which is your classrooms, which is for your students. And whether you were pushed or pulled into being at this conference, often we always wonder how we get here, right? Did we get asked to be here? Did we come on our own volition? But the key part is that it really was an entrepreneurial process for you to be here. But congratulations, you're here. Now what? What are you going to teach on Monday that you learned here at this conference? Well, I have been asked by so many people to create an exercise that everyone across campus can do no matter what the environment, no matter what the major. As a matter of fact, I've done this exercise now with over 8,000 individuals, and I've done it both in an academic environment and I've done it in a corporate environment. I've had corporate CEOs do it, I've had brand management teams do it, I've had people on a factory floor do it. And what's unique about this exercise is that not only is it experiential, but it goes through an entrepreneurial process that begins before entrepreneurial behavior actually happens. And so we have to ask the question, and of course, I thought it was great as I reflect on all the wonderful speakers that have been here so far. I love the fact that Paul Spielman, when he was here earlier, talked about how culture and focuses on the behaviors that people show every day. That Chris Gill talked about one of the important things about entrepreneurs is that it seems that the average age of a good creative idea comes from entrepreneurs and startups that are the average age of 40. You see, that's no surprise to me, being a professional creative, because when I've worked with teams, there seems to be a certain maturation process, like a fine wine that goes along with creativity, and that's called living. Your living experiences are probably the most important skill you can have in order to predict how well you'll create ideas. So I have to ask the question, how do we then quickly age our young students who live in the world of their own bubble context of the small world around them so that they can go out and create expansive new ideas? Well, the challenge lies in the way we've always taught people, and that's from memory, from assessment. And pedagogically, it's really easy to constrain and confine things in nice little buckets, but it doesn't really work well for the process of search. And I became a big fan of Steve Blank. I had never heard him speak before, but I jumped out of my chair about 15 times yesterday listening to him speak. And I loved the definition. He said, what's a startup? I had my notes here from yesterday. I love to take lots of notes. He said, a temporary organization designed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. To which I looked at the room, everyone's going, yeah, Steve, dude, that's rocking, you know. That's really outstanding, except I had to put my chin up and say to myself, that precludes something very important, and that is, do you know how to search? You see, a temporary organization built around that great talent that everyone talks about, Chris Gill talked about the aggregation of talent and that people buy startup companies for the talent. I get asked by VCs all the time to come in and evaluate the talent. And of course, they bring their resumes and they bring their business plan, and I tell them, put all that stuff aside. I want you to think for me, out loud, in front of me, on stage. As a matter of fact, I have 3 chairs up here. I'd like those of you who are really brave and extroverted to think about who would like to fill these 3 chairs and be my guinea pigs a little bit later when we do our exercise. So think about the first 3 people that are first mover advantage to the chairs a little bit later on will be greatly rewarded for the experience. But the cool part is that what does it take to become a great thinker? Because to me, who are these people in the startup that's temporary? And do they have the capacity to be an entrepreneur? So today we're going to really explore that, because the thing I always ask every entrepreneur when I'm evaluating talent, fill in this blank. Can you fill in this very simple question? I help who to do what so that they can what? Now if you think about it, that's targeted product to targeted customers, exactly what Steve was talking about. It's a very simple question. If an entrepreneur can't answer this, they'll go, oh, Jeff, I got to show you this. I got to explain it to you. I have my deck. I have my plan. No, if you can't fill out this sentence and so that I can get it and understand it, you aren't yet an entrepreneur. You're still a person who is dreaming about a real-world scenario where everything works perfectly. And we do that as inventors. When we create ideas, we have that perfect world scenario where we can imagine where everything is going to work out just right. And you're going to exhibit that today during this exercise. So today's journey is I'm going to give you a little perspective of why we're challenged with getting students a method that helps them be better at searching. And it isn't as complicated as you might think. We don't need fancy formula. And I always love the fact that those of us from science, we talk about the scientific method and try to apply it to business. Again, a very interesting perception in the fact that we actually think that people can actually make a hypothesis. Sure, it's about starting with a hypothesis, but the question is, do they know what they're looking at in order to even make a hypothesis? We spend tremendous amounts of time in the sciences teaching people what to look at. And so I'm a big fan of that process. So we're going to do some cool experiential stuff. We're going to search for some cool ideas. We're going to make decisions on these cool ideas, because in many ways, the most important entrepreneurial behavior is making a value-focused decision. We're going to reflect on this aha moment when you get done today and try to figure out why it works. And then I want to show you how we can find rubrics and understand ways in which we can measure the value of these cool ideas for the students. So from my perspective, how do we teach students to search? And oftentimes people just say they just need to be more creative. We just need to teach them how to brainstorm. That couldn't be anything further from the truth, because brainstorming in the classical sense no longer works the way that it used to. And the major reason for that is for the things that you see on the table. You have all kinds of access to content. Now, there's no mystery as to why that newspaper is on your table. A little bit later on, you're going to be using that newspaper as your stimulus. But the fact of the matter is, everything you need to know today in the world is on Google. So one of the things that we have to be aware of is that entrepreneurship is so heavily embedded in assessment methods. Can you name for me this, this, and this? Name me the 5 factors for this. Name me the 3 things that go along with this. The big question that I love to ask, and I am a big fan of the flipped classroom, or as we like to call it, the inverted classroom, which I first started to see back in 1999 when I was teaching at Miami University in Ohio with Dr. Morris, when Glenn Platt, who was an economics professor, decided to turn the tables of how information was transferred in a university environment in the classroom. I've always been a big believer that the content you come preloaded with, and in the classroom, I mentor you to help you understand, are the things that you're thinking about, are they helping you move forward towards success or further away? I see my role as a creative, especially as a professional creative with my corporate clients, to help them find their way to a successful idea. The same thing is true with the students. And so what is the one skill that every entrepreneurship student needs to have experience in? Well, it's about making the right decisions with the things that they think about. They live in a very unique, well, I guess, idea system. They live in a very neat ecosystem that goes probably about as far as the edge of campus, what they see on Facebook, and what they learn from video games. That's about the best I can come up with. But from that, we have to figure out how to jog them past that, because we have to fight this concept of what I like to call reality drift. What they think they see and what it actually is. In my research, and I poll people after they create ideas, we find that 65% of the college students that we work with across the country can't differentiate the difference between an opinion and a fact. Now I'll pause for a moment for you to write that down. 65% of the students over 4,000 people in my database, 65% of them couldn't differentiate when tested to differentiate the difference between a fact and an opinion, and couldn't articulate how they might figure that out. So now we're trying to create these organizations that they're in search of some sort of scalable business model when they can't even determine what is reality. Hard to make a hypothesis when you don't know where you stand. Earth is flatter, right? If you still believe the earth is flat, then you're probably resonating with that idea, right? But the point is, there has happened a real gap in the ability of individuals to figure out how do they progress from that, and we're going to explore that. So I'm a big believer of different pedagogical approaches. I love to use context-rich questions. I like to pose to them questions that make them search. And we're going to talk about this inductive process of search as opposed to its cousin that we do most of the time in education called deductive logic, and look at it from a very fresh perspective. Because I'm a big fan of guided discovery. And today you're going to get a chance to do that. It'll be fun. You're going to get caught up in your own thinking. You're going to get caught up in all those years of trying to figure out how to get the best out of every administrator you've ever worked for, from everybody you've had to report to or answer to, because we live in that safe zone of, am I right? Because, you know, we only have two kinds of people left in this world, right? We have the winners and the losers. And who wants to be on the losing team? See, when I ask who's the table that's going to win, they are where? They're like these guys over here, right? The frat dudes over here that are just like, yeah, dude, we're ready for it, okay? They've already ordered a keg and a pizza. I saw them get on the phone while they were over there, okay? But the thing is if we're going to get the students, whether they're professional MBAs or adult learners, and they're going to create ideas for business plans, the fact of the matter is we have to teach them how to search for the models that they're going to look at, and what are the elements that even makes a model. Oftentimes, people get confused with all those constructs and all the things that they have to memorize in order to call it a business model. I'm simply looking for ideas that are transactable. Ideas that are transactable. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go through it. I'm a big fan of Kevin Hindle's work. I first heard it at ICSB, at a international ICSB in about 2007, when he came across and discussed his concept of entrepreneurial capacity. And it has two components. There's a competency component, and there's the personal capability to act entrepreneurial. Now, I'm a big fan of this process because in my work in 25 years as a professional creative, I have seen many people blanch at the requirement in their job to come up with something new. Now, I'm not talking what we call the ER ideas, like whiter, brighter, cleaner, now with extra flavor, right? Nacho, cheesier Doritos. I can't tell you the number of times that I had to put up with those kinds of so-called innovations. Those safe little movements that we see where students and professionals don't want to go past their comfort zone are basically memory-based deductive logic gone wrong. So what are we trying to do when we're trying to get students to improve their search competence? I'm trying to get them past their rational self, all the memory-based learning that they put up with from the time they started their first class in kindergarten all the way up through college. All they want, you know how it is, right? They come in, they want the syllabus. They want to know exactly how many points, what do they have to do, what do they have to know, what will be on the test. Every time you put a slide up, they go, will that be on the test? They look at the textbook, and of course, do you have this happening now? They do pod learning. So they won't all buy a textbook. A group of 4 will chip in and buy a textbook. You'll read chapter 1, you'll read chapter 2, you'll read chapter 3. Then they'll meet at the coffee shop, and they'll discuss it and say, what'd you find out? And then I recently was at a university. I walked down the hall, I kid you not, and it was an accounting class. And I happened to listen in the door, and the professor went, on page 36, chapter 2, underline this sentence, it'll be in the chest. Go to chapter 40, go to chapter 4, page such and such, paragraph 3. I can't even say it right, it makes me so mad. Underline the following phrase, it'll be on the test. I literally wanted to bust in and go, are you nuts? Students, run! Right? This is when you need to pull a fire alarm at a university, okay? There are times where that is required. Because what I'm a big believer of is that in order to find the creative self, it's already there, it just never gets used. And we need to develop better input-based learning systems to allow students to actually experience it. I'm a big believer, like Tom said, I think conferences need to be turned upside down. You should be here practicing entrepreneurship. You should be here doing the things that we do because that's how we learn and that's how we grow. So, can a student be too creative? Of course, the interesting temptation is to say, no, we need them to be more creative. But the fact of the matter is, most people are actually too creative. In other words, they're good at spinning out thoughts. As a matter of fact, I tend to call people way too imaginative, and yet they can't harness their imagination to make it productive creativity. So what do I do as a professional creative? Many times people get confused about us special high-maintenance employees. I used to get offended when people used to call me a high-maintenance employee. You know, university deans have called me this, university presidents have called me this, and CEOs of Fortune 100 companies have called me this. And I no longer find this a bad title. Why? Because I figured out what it meant to be a high-maintenance employee. It turns out they asked me and paid me, well, to create ideas for them. And then all the threatened other managers and other people around me would then spend an inordinate amount of time and money just trying to kill the ideas that I came up with. So by definition, I was a drain on the bottom line because it cost a lot more money to outdo the good ideas that we came up with, which mean often we come up with some really good ones and therefore they're very expensive. But my job as a creative is not to come up with stuff. See, people misunderstand the goal of the creative exercise. Creativity is really about making predictions on how ideas will respond to change. In other words, an idea here versus an idea there in different environments have very different contexts. And you're going to experience that today when you try to wrestle with this creative exercise. The point you're always going to have in your head is, what does Jeff want? Jeff doesn't want anything. It's what do you want? And you better get used to it. I used to walk in, presidents will hire me, and I'll walk in, they'll go, okay, glad you're here, tell us what to do. I'm like, this isn't how this works. What do you want to do? And my job is to help you figure out how the ideas you have will respond to the change that you try to do with it. Steve talked about this and touched at its surface that there are a lot of failures on the way to a startup. Well, the fact of the matter is there's a lot of ideas that just need to get tossed out because we can't figure out what their response is or the response is negative. You see, I've always believed if you don't like something, change it. But if you can't change it, change the way you look at it. This is especially true when you work with administrations in most major universities, right? You get told no, and no is simply a boundary context for what you need to try to do next. I've heard this often in the corporate world. So what does an entrepreneurial creative do as opposed to just a regular creative? Well, they have to learn to make predictions on how ideas that respond to change can become opportunities. You see, there is a utility requirement in an entrepreneurial context for something that we can do, the most important thing that we do as entrepreneurs, and that's not necessarily start business, it's to find a way to repeat a transaction. Got one? How do I get more? And then how do we get a lot more? And can we make anything out of this? Can we make enough profitability in order for that to happen? My students are always amazed when I say in the very first part of a creative exercise, we're going to create profitable ideas. They're like, we don't even know what the topic is yet. They get freaked out by the concept of a profitable idea. A profitable idea is something where, well, we have a dog in the room. Where's our guide dog? He's over there. But if you ever take a dog and you whistle at it, what's a dog do? They go like this. They go. You know what? That's the most beautiful sight in the world when you whistle at a dog and they go. Because guess what? You've got their cognitive awareness. You see, all I want my students to do in a classroom is to do this. So at the end of the class today, if you just do this, I'll be very happy because at least if nothing else, I got in their head. And if I get in their head, then stuff can percolate because what may be an opportunity right this minute takes some time for it to evolve. And I'm going to show you why this experiment and this exercise is so valuable because then I'll show you some of the students from Oklahoma State University. I've got some stuff here from the Belmont students that did this exercise. And what's great about it is I'll show you what the students come up with and what they wrestle with because you'll wrestle with the exact same thoughts. This accelerates their creative exercise because we're all familiar with the use of language. And so what does a creative entrepreneur do or an entrepreneurial creative do? They have to make the big leap from can I to what can I do with that? In other words, how do I figure out where the truth is and how do I get there? So from an entrepreneurial context, to me, creativity is a process of divergent thinking in search of an opportunity. In other words, productive imagination is, yes, it may be funny, it may be irreverent, it may make people blush, it may be all kinds of things from 6 shades of gray to totally inappropriate, and everybody has the ability to use their 7th grade humor. People will tell me all the time, Jeff, I'm afraid to use creativity in the classroom because I don't know what the students are going to say. Too bad, buck up, it's a lot of fun. Because what happens is, the more irreverent an idea is, students, I may actually make them face it. If they can't talk about it eloquently and actually be able to argue the point, they begin to realize, oh yeah, that's just being stupid, isn't it? And I'm like, yeah. As a matter of fact, they always say in education, there are no stupid questions. Guess what? There are stupid questions, okay? Stupid questions, by definition, are those that do not take into account the most important thing that an idea has to do. It has to be transactionable, and it has to have value. If it's no value, it's a worthless need to us, and therefore it's a waste of our intellectual capacity. So to search is about disciplining your mind to be alert to what you might find. I teach my students this process I call purposeful possibility. You see, when you release the notion that something has to be sold, that's not a transaction. A transaction is an exchange of value. That's all it simply is. And it can be a lot of different things that we exchange. But purposeful possibility is the beginning part of what great entrepreneurs need to do. I like to call this, and it's my own term, I realize we haven't researched it pedagogically correct yet, but I like to call this proto-entrepreneurial behavior. Before you sell anything, you have to have one particular characteristic that we can measure in individuals, and we can get a sense of where they lie. They have to, at first, desire to make a difference. You see, in science, if you don't have a gap between something with potential and where it's at, there's no energy movement. You have to have a gap in order to get something to move. We love to call this creative friction in some cases, but the fact of the matter is you have to be able to at least desire to be able to make a difference. Whether you know which direction you're running yet, I have students all the time running out the door going 42 different directions. I guess there's only 4, but the fact of the matter is they're out there and they're busy and they desire to make a difference. They have to recognize that things can change. People who don't want to change are only afraid of one thing. They're like people who won't share their ideas. I tell students all the time, I get entrepreneurs that come to me, Jeff, in order to have this conversation, you have to sign an NDA. I go, well, conversation over. Because if you're not willing to share your idea, you're just literally telling someone, I don't think I can come up with another one, man. I got to protect the only one I have. And people who are tenaciously hang on to it, I can't tell you this because I don't want anybody to hear about it, are people who literally don't understand that the world can change. And the actual idea that I might actually have enough interest in your idea or enough money or desire or time to go copy your idea, I literally think, what do you mean? You don't think I can come up with another idea either? So the fact of the matter is we have to get to the point where we get students to recognize that things can change and they have to sense that there are other ways to see the world. I literally love to tip them upside down and ask them the big question that Hewlett-Packard talked about for so many years, why not, right? And then they have to be determined to turn the beliefs that they have into facts that matter. Now, it's interesting. Steve talked about this yesterday as well, they have to be able to leave the world of the reality of what they see and figure out how to turn it into facts. This is what really confounds a lot of entrepreneurs, whether they're 40 years old or they're 20 years old. As a matter of fact, I maintain a lot of our 20-year-olds have some of the most oldest 40-year-old brains I've ever seen. Because I live in an entrepreneurial world where this definition that we use at the experiential classroom that Dr. Morris and team have put together is it's a process of creating value. In other words, because it's a process and it creates value by bringing together a unique set of resources in order to pursue the opportunity. Now, I love that because that's what entrepreneurs should be thinking about, but what they end up doing then is pursuing those opportunities without regard to the resources they have under control. You see, understanding and experiencing that inside of 15, 20 minutes that you're going to do right now is important because it really makes one understand that whether you're doing something simple at a table with a team or whether you're trying to create this new startup venture, the same mechanisms of proto-entrepreneurial behavior and search will dictate where you go and what you're willing to stand up to and fight for the resources, which is the adulation of this entire group, and your own sense of accomplishment. I'm a big believer in the concept of intentions because at the end of the day, if we're going to be in business, like I tell my students, business is not that hard to figure out. It really is simply only the exchange of value between two people. Without that exchange, there is no transaction, and that's the core of it, and we can do that in many, many different ways. So before we transact in dollars, we have to transact in words. And that, with the creative, that is our medium of exchange, words. And so today I thought it'd be a lot of fun to give you a sense of how do we contextualize this and put this in a framework that makes a lot of sense. So to do this, I have to warm up your brains a little bit because what you're going to do is you're going to go back to your rational self and use your memory, and then we'll get to busy. So I want you to think about context, and I want you to use your first impression as a guide. And I was asked to show this picture again. I showed this picture a number of years ago, and it's a classic one that we use. But if I were to ask you to say in your mind, what do you see when you see this picture? What do you see? You say, I see an airplane, right? I see an airplane, I see a blue sky, I see a hand, I see a white box. What you do is you go into your memory, you look at the things that you recognize because you were taught that a thing with two wings on it, with a tail on it, you probably flew on a plane to get here, that loosely represents something you would call an airplane. You all recognize that that's a hand, and most of us have memorized what the color blue is. So if I ask you, what do you see, and you now search the picture for your perceptions of what you look at, these are the things that you come up with. Yet for the creative, this is only the world that we know. It isn't enough because it doesn't tell us about what it could be. Oftentimes I get people, I say, how many people see a white box there? And they raise their hand, and I'll say, why do you suppose I put it there? Now this becomes the fun rationalization part. They go, well, you were probably trying to hide some words that were on the picture. Actually, no, I put the white box there to see if you'd see it. And they go, oh, no, you didn't. I go, no, I did. And it becomes like an argument because people will see and perceive the world the way they want to. We all have preconceived notions, and that's how we get ourselves into trouble. But you see, the answer to any question is, what do you see? Is, it depends. It depends. You see, we have to have that one side. I'm not disavowing the fact that we need to have assessment, rational, deductive-based learning processes in school. That's how we learn to read, through pure memorization. That's how we learn facts. That's how we learn history. We learn all kinds of things by content. We wouldn't know Porter's 5 forces unless we memorized them. We wouldn't know the 4 P's of marketing unless we memorized them. The big question is, it depends if we're going to apply them on what? It depends on their context driven by their perception. In other words, can you search for a place to use these things? Well, here's how we have to do this. The drivers of search are very important because they're a part of your cognitive natural machinery, but we don't often exercise them very well or very effectively. There are very simple ones, the action ones. I love it, the old journalism, who, what, why, when, right? If you ask those questions, it helps you to establish context. I love behavior, feeling, and consequences. Make whatever you see come alive. Sure, what if I were to say, oh, I feel like a balsa wood airplane today? How do I feel? Well, you get an interpretation because you saw my cool dance moves, and you saw the fact that I seem to be light and full of life and energy, so therefore, like a balsa wood airplane, I have the possibility of freedom. And yet the other people are going, are you nuts? You know what happens when you let go of that balsa wood airplane? I could just as well have went, oh my God, I feel like a balsa wood airplane today. My dean is after me today. right? Because what happens after you throw that plane? It hits the ground and it breaks because it's fragile. In other words, looking deeper into what something can be requires you to peel back the active layers of meaning and understand what it is that you're looking for. And then, of course, sensory locution. You see, most people dominate their life with one or only one major sensory input, either your visual or your auditory. You know, the funny part about it is you have 5. You have 5 sensory inputs. We're a machine with 5 wonderful, beautiful sensory inputs. Now, I'm constrained physiologically by the fact that I have to deal with all 5 of my sensory inputs at all times. You know, I'm always very fascinated by what flavor that airplane might taste like. Now you're thinking to me, Jeff, that's stupid. It's wood. It tastes woody. You see, that's your rational brain saying that's what it tastes like. You know, this podium, what do you suppose it tastes like? You want me to lick it? And people go, no, that's creepy creativity right there. But if you look at its color, what color does it say to you its flavor might be? Chocolate, caramel. People go, no, it's not chocolate. Chocolate's different. Well, if you start to argue already, you got a lot of trouble. You're going to have to stay after class. We have a long ways to go with you. But the fact of the matter is, if I say now to you, what do you see? And you open up your mind to the possibility of all the various levels of search that can take place, now all of a sudden this picture takes on emotion. It takes on personality. It brings back memories from your childhood. It allows for it to be whatever it wants to be. In other words, my new friend who has a guide dog, I want you to articulate and be nice and loud. How is your charge, this young dog, like this picture? Connect the two. And sometimes when you let him go out in public, you think he's going to go somewhere, and he goes somewhere else. Now, look at her right now. Notice she's doing the most important thing that happened to her cognitively. She's smiling. Why? For those of you who are effectuators and who really love all the great research that's done about what goes on in entrepreneurship, she just had it happen. She sense-made something. She took that picture, she took it to something that's relevant to her life, and she did sense-making. She had an aha moment because it made sense to her, and that's happy. And the rest of you go, I could probably see that. They've met the dog. She's been pouring crumbs on it all morning. The dog's like, hey, what am I doing here? I'm in San Francisco. I'm supposed to be working. No, I'm not. And then off he runs, right? The cute part about it is we can understand that now because we communicated it with language, and everybody went back to their memory and went, yeah, I can about imagine a dog that's young, 14 months old, probably hasn't figured out what to do yet. Oh, isn't that cute? And then we're forgiving if he eats your sandwich at the opening mixer, he's grabbing people's cheese, right? And so we all understand that. But the fact of the matter is, in the beginning parts of it, we don't open ourselves up to that possibility because we're constrained by what has to be. So the 3 constructs that I like to call them of creativity have a structural component and an emotional component. I'm going to show you the structural components because you're going to be using that now as you do the exercise. And the 3 of them are context. You have to always be flexible and limber about what context you assign. Second of all, you have to understand and assign what connections are possible, and be clear about them, and then link those to a consequence, to an outcome, to a value, to something that can be transacted. So you have to start with a context that's connected to something which is a consequence for the behavior that you're trying to see. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. You have a newspaper at your table. You didn't think I put that there for nothing. USASBE was so kind to make sure that we had enough of these. And what you're going to do is we're going to invent new English words. Now, the beautiful part about this is that the English language has this amazingly malleable DNA. Because we can split words with syllables, they become a lot of fun. Now, you're only going to get about 10, 15 minutes, but my students do this very, very easily. Now, you're going to be working at a table. It's best to work in groups of 2s or 3s. So if you find yourself sitting at a table all by yourself, find another table and join a team. You've just been acquired and mergers and acquisition. I want you to work really hard. You have some blank pieces of paper at your table. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through a very simple exercise. I'm going to show you what the students do, and I'm going to show you why it works so well. As a matter of fact, hybrid words have always been a part of the English language. For example, the word geostationary, you can pretty much figure it out. It's land that doesn't move. I kind of threw that word in since we're in San Francisco, a not necessarily geostationary place. The word television was created because the ability to see from a long distance away, this magical box that allowed you to see from a long distance away. The automobile. And of course, I'm from Minneapolis, a very interesting word that combines a Lakota Sioux word, mini, which means water, and polis, which means city of water. That's all that means. Minnesota, unfortunately, is not a hybrid word. It actually is a Lakota word, right? So it just means city where the water looks, or the sky looks like the water. And that's what we know of as where these words come from origin. So hybrid words are very common. The dictionary, sorry about that. The dictionary must consider new words every year. The Merriam-Webster people, I had a great conversation with them this year. Every year I try to get the new words that they put into the dictionary. This year, 2012, here are some new words that were invented that were just put in the dictionary. A flexitarian. A flexitarian, flexible and vegetarian or whatever. A flexitarian is a person who can eat almost anything flexibly and still survive. Whether they go back and forth between vegetarianism or being a carnivore, they go back and forth. I think that's just called a person at a buffet, a flexitarian. Another word from the food industry called a gastropub. You've seen that. This is simply called fancy bar food that you're willing to pay a lot for. It's called a slider, okay? You fell for that one. You paid for it. Sexting, I had no need to explain that one. The F-bomb, which is a hybrid word with a hyphen in it. And I'm so excited that the word aha moment actually made Webster's dictionary this year. Now, all of us creatives since 1960 have been waiting for, since Alex Osborne coined that term, aha moment, can now legitimately say, students, that'll be on a test, because now it's in a dictionary. Even I go to assessment methods of memorization, right? The next thing that's always fascinating about words in general is that culture uses word innovation as a way of being able to label what is the new cool. So today you get to determine what's going to be the new cool. Words like fantabulous. Have you heard that word, fantabulous? Anybody know where that word first came up? I get students all the time that love to argue this word, fantabulous. Van Morrison actually has it in one of his songs, fantabulous. Infotainment, you've heard this word, chillax. Or one of my new favorite words that students just love to pick up, craptastic. Just take the word tastic and add it to anything and you can invent a word. There's kind of like a clue to the test. I have students who have like 42 tastic words that they hand in, okay? And then brand identity is always wrapped up in commercial words. Some great ones that I love from the old school, NyQuil just means night that is tranquil. That's where that word came up, NyQuil. As a matter of fact, YouTube, Gizmodo, Squidoo, TechCrunch. You see, the reason I love to use this exercise is because at some point, everyone's going to have to create a name for something. Naming and branding. I've actually had students now that literally have left my program and start branding organizations. David Knox from the University of Miami of Ohio has started a company in Cincinnati called The Brandery. And The Brandery is a brand incubator, a hatchery. So a brand hatchery, he calls it The Brandery. And he wrote to me and he goes, hey, wasn't that pretty cool? I used the stuff I learned in class. Well, thank God something stuck, right? Okay. So what you're going to do is very simple. You're going to work in groups of 2s or 3s, and I want you to do this very fast, and it's a lot of fun. I want to hear some talking. I'm going to have the video guys. If there are 3 people who want to come up here and be my guest audience and be first mover advantage and be up here and work up here with me, I didn't think so. Your professor's your chicken, okay? So that's, oh, that calls them out. Here we go. Okay. So the first 3 that get chairs, okay, so we have to have 4. Oh, look at this. All right. Okay, so I will put another chair up here. We have room for 4. You're not out. I put another chair. Just like a professor to go, oh, I lost. I'm out. Students would be carrying their chair. There'd be like 42 students up here. See, Clark, you were worried that no one would volunteer. You know, it's great. These good, smart kids, they just love to watch professors do this. So they're going to be competing against you. So who's going to win now? Oh, okay, Ray. Okay, so what you're going to do is very simple. Now, I know people love the way I do instructions. It's called listen and react. You're going to look for very interesting multiple syllable words, big juicy words. Don't read the paper, just let your eye scan. The best way to do it is to actually take the paper and read from the bottom up. Just kind of scan the paper and look for big juicy words. Write them down on your paper and get about 10 or 15 of them down. Then what I want you to do is I want you to split up the words. I want you to split the words up, and then what I want you to do is to add, subtract, combine, smash them together so that you can look for a new contextualization, create a new meaning. Now, I'm going to be handing you some 3x5 cards because here's the asset that you have to create. You have to create a new word. I want you to define what are the two words from which it comes from, what you smashed it into, define it, give it a meaning, okay? And then what you have to do is that you're going to use it in a sentence because you're going to share that with the crowd, okay? And you're going to share those with the group. I'll give you an example just to get you started. Here's some students from Oklahoma State University. How about this one? Entrepreneur. Entrepreneur is someone who pitches a business plan that is full of crap. Right, Bruce? You can be so proud of the students at OSU for things like this. Here's another one. A knuckleodian, a politician that says the same thing over and over so many times, it gets annoying. You see, what they're doing is they're just taking two words, split them apart, smash random words together, and give them meaning. Do an effectuation process live and tickle your brain and have some fun. Go. Talk now. Work together as a team. Okay, here's what I want to do. I love the buzz in the room, but I need to get you all back here because they're going to pull me off the stage at about 15 minutes. And I want to make sure that we combine the dots here, connect the dots to what you did. And I'm going to put in a new chapter in my new book. I'm going to have an appendix called USASBE 2012, or 2013, so we put these ideas in the back of the book. But what's great about this is, if you notice, there's a lot of fun to be had with lighting your mind up with purposeful possibility. And the great part about purposeful possibility is you begin to see how these ideas can actually be used. Now, what I do with... oh, wow. Derangerous. These are great. I have so much fun with this. This is great. Now, if you noticed, it's one thing to take the words and split them up. Let's look at the activities. You split them up, you let your mind play, you put them back together, and you had that momentary aha where you went, this is brilliant! And then you tried to say it to the person next to you, and they went, huh? Sounds like a tech idea, doesn't it, right? And the reason is that quietly in your mind, it sounds right, but because we already have memorization of language, when people hear two words together that they've never heard before, there's this moment of cognitive dissonance that's so important, and people will get different points of view about your idea. In other words, we already had that. What was the word that I said, and you said, no, my idea is different? What was it? Techno what? Where'd she go? Was it technoflation? Techflation. And they have a different definition, but I've already seen this word techflation. It's now an idea that people use to try to propagate the next tech bubble. It's techflation. She goes, oh no, I have a different idea, which I love because that's the tenacity that all inventors have to have. They stick with their ideas, but notice what one person thinks, another person can also think. And what's also interesting is how people come up with ideas. Our studio audience up in the front, what'd you come up with? Give us a couple of your great ideas. There's a microphone is there. Should be on.
We have about 3 words there.
Okay.
Facio. We pick it from Facebook and radio.
Facio.
Yes.
Facio, okay.
Facio,
So Facebook and radio.
So he's talking about, the definition is radio streaming of Facebook feeds.
So radio streaming of your Facebook page. That's all we need is radio streaming of our Facebook. Yeah, I want to give you $1 million for Facio. That's a great word, though. They would say, oh, Jeff, there you are, killing ideas again. No, I just giving my opinion. That was good. Okay. Good one. What else did you have?
The second one is
Inflatable. Inflatabook, okay.
It's also from Facebook and inflation. So niche social media for those worried about inflation.
So a niche social media site for those worried about inflation. Wow, the skyisfalling.com. Yes, that's great. What else do we have?
Then the third one is Design Investor. We have it from designer and investors.
Okay, so design and investors. So someone who invests in design companies is a design investor.
Well, actually, it's
I like that. Well, actually, Jeff, let me school you on the definitions we've just created. Yeah, I get this all the time from my students, like, come on, dummy, come on, catch up! Okay.
well, it's an investment strategy. You only invest in companies that design eloquent products, as opposed to Muttvester, who invest in just anything.
In any dog company that comes along, a Muttvester, yes. Like I said, fill in the blank. I do this to help so-and-so so they can do what? That was a long explanation, PowerPoints to follow. Love it, good job. Okay, what's what we got down here?
Okay, so public plosion, suddenly bursting into dance in public.
Slow down, everybody,
Oh.
catch that? Public
And implosion.
and explosion.
Explosion.
So a public
Explosion.
plosion. Everyone say that out loud. Public plosion. Now, see, it sounds cool till you have to say it, right? Public plosion. Say that quickly on David Letterman. Okay, I love it. So dance in public.
We have scanaclysmic, students who are obsessed with QR codes.
That are what?
Scanner and cataclysmic. Scanaclysmic.
Scanner and cataclysmic go together to make scannerclysmic. And what are they? What kind of student is that?
Students who are obsessed with QR codes. They scan everything.
They're obsessed with their
Scanaclysmic.
cameras and they scan everything. Now, what's neat about it is that ideas are unique. What I tend to have the students do is they have to create the words, and we do this in one classroom. Then in the next class period, they have to come back and they have had to practice the words. They have to get themselves on video. They have to use the words in their conversational language with their friends, and they have to see if they can sell the idea of this word's usage to someone else. Then they get 3 weeks to proliferate the terms on their campus. And they're graded by where can they find these words being used in the public. Oftentimes they try to get it on the college TV station. They try to get it in the college newspaper. They get people to Facebook it. In other words, they do all the entrepreneurial things you have to do with the business, and that is get some customers, start a transaction, and get people to talk about it. But you see, language is like that. Language is the conversation that we have with each other. The word infotainment, we hear it all the time now, and when the first people use it, people go, what do you mean by infotainment? Right? So these become very important. One of the ones that I really liked was the group that had this word, free employees. These are employees that work for a tech startup for nothing, a free employee. That
Very
is
good,
a commercial
that's good.
word. Whose idea was that? Give them a big hand over there. That was a really, really good one.
Jeff,
There are all kinds of irreverent testosterone ones.
Excuse me, Jeff.
Jeff, we have one that describes you.
Oh, you've got one? Okay.
Yeah.
One that describes me?
Yes.
Really? In front of
Yes.
everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
Gestastic, which is
Oh.
gestures and fantastic.
Oh.
Gestastic. Using
We
gestures.
call that the brown-nosed
fantastically.
students over there. Yes, that's very good. That's great. Testosteroclysmic. Testosteroclysmic. A man so afraid of appearing feminine that he overdoses on his own masculinity. That was called the 70s in disco. Okay. Transform. See, now this is great. It's transformation and opportunity. Transformtunity. Transformtunity. Now you have to, see, it's interesting. You get these cognitive dissonance in your head and you're just like, oh, I want to say it, but I got to get it over my mouth. Jeff Stamp's students use transfortunity to become healthy, wealthy, and wise. Oh, I love the brown nosing. You all get D's for that. And then, of course, there's always the sports fans. Manningled, what Peyton Manning will do to the Baltimore Ravens today. Yes, that's situational awareness. So what I love about these is that they really, oh, like this one, Prize Daddy, a conference keynote speaker who gives out awards for the best awards. Okay, so I think there's a hint there. People know what's going to happen. For a failed operation, a failation. A failation. Again, very good ones. Beverage and emergency. This is a good one. Beverage and emergency. A bevergency. Say that out loud with me. Bevergency. A bevergency. A critical need for an alcoholic beverage. Thank you, Dr. White, for having that happen all weekend. Okay. But the key point is, as you look at some of these words, these again from some of the students that we have at OSU, salivosive. Salivosive, saliva and explosive, a food that is so desirable it causes you to drool excessively at just the mere thought of it. Techruptive, A new technology that only disrupts the technology in place and not the user's experience. It's sort of reproductive technology. Oh, of course, you always get the word orgasm with every student group at some point. Amazing and enthusiasm. It's an amaziasm, something so exciting it produces an orgasm. And our digital world has just gone awry. Fictisational, politicians whose ideas for change are absolutely ridiculous. And of course, newsiverse, news that creates its own universe, spelled Kardashians with a K. So the students really have a good time with all of this. And of course, we get words that, and I've got thousands of these words, and I love to show them. One of the words that became very popular, and I can't remember which school it was, is the word tech noodle. A tech noodle is a person with all the electronic gadgets and all the games, but doesn't actually know how any of them work. But just pretends. It's all those people working at the Apple store. Just go down the street, you can see this happening. This one the students used, and it got around campus, and I don't want to tell you which university this is, but see if it recognizes it at your university. A regurgiversity, a professor who teaches the same thing over and over again each semester. A regurgiversity. That one stuck. I got a call from the president of this university and said, I hear you're spreading rumors about our faculty. I said, who, me? I said, what we're really trying to do is to get students to create ideas, and that's the context from which they come from. Any other questions? To which he said, would you please come to my office and explain this to me? So we did that. But the key thing is that, again, intentions, if you're really versed in intentions, you know that there are two components of intentions that are very important. And that is your propensity to act on the idea that you have is really balanced by your perceived desirability of the idea and its perceived feasibility. What's neat about it is that what we're doing here is giving you a source of informed intent. Hang on one second, I want to make sure I get this. I'm giving you a sense of informed intent. We're having all kinds of fun here. In the fact that what I'm looking for students to do is to pull both of those switches in their mind so they'll actually stand up and talk about it. I've yet to see a group of people worldwide, and I've done this now in 5 different languages. German is a very fun language to make compound words in. They just add a bunch of stuff together and they make these big 40-letter words. Swedish is a good one. I teach in Finland. The actual official language at Abo Academy is Swedish, and that becomes a very fun language. Hebrew is a lot of fun when I was in Israel working with students. And so many languages have the same propensity to bring new meaning, but it's interesting because students won't stand up and pitch an idea until they get their intentions aligned. And that's that proto-entrepreneurial we're looking for, because as a mathematician, I'm a Bayesian mathematician, which means I make predictions about things not in abstract and assume randomness, but by the things that we know prior to making an assumption to what goes on. You see, what's interesting is that you can see the pivot very easily in this exercise. See if this happened to you. I had students, for example, that they wanted to take the concept of religion and change. They found the word religion, and they really wanted to try to take religion and change. What they did is they came up with this word called religiosity. Religiosity, a cult whose influences spreads rapidly. Religion and velocity. And then other students started to kill the idea because they said, well, there already is a word called religiosity, which is the level of religious activity, dedication, or belief. And so they started to say, well, you can't have 2 words in the same market space. Notice how we teach that with students, how to find and identify a market opportunity space. And then one other student goes, oh, but wait a minute, didn't you see that Bill Maher thing? What was that Bill Maher thing called again? Religulous, where he took religion and ridiculous and made a documentary film about the foibles of religion. So now all of a sudden there are 3 similar words fighting for usage. And my students spent an entire half a class debating whether or not these ideas would stick. Again, what's fascinating about words is that they really do have a lot of fun. We had the words pessimism, optimism, and play. So they came up with the word a placemist. A placemist. Now people start going, well, you don't put the Y in the middle of a word like that. It should be an I. Okay, let it be. It's not a grammar class. It's an invention class, right? Create before you assume. But someone who never thinks they'll win. But then you have the Platomist, the person who always thinks they'll win, like Peyton Manning, right? The Platomist. But then, of course, they had to switch and pivot because placemist and platimist didn't seem like a lot of fun, so they came up with the word platimacy. This was not probably a very good pivot because it's the act of getting it on at a sporting event. To which they got in the newspaper, on the campus television, and started a new trend of which I'm not very proud of. Again, urban legend is all the sake of perception, right? So the point is, as we sail off into the sunset, and I'll pass through a couple of these, is I get my students to actually create their words and then figure out which is going to be the word that will win. Again, these are a set of words by a group. Demi-achieving, someone who only gets half their work done but always gets full credit in the eyes of their boss or teacher. Kind of like tenure review, right? Administreaching, when someone uses a procedural rule to enforce their position instead of doing the work necessary to actually prove they are right or wrong. Superbesity, someone who is bigger loser, obese, right? Superbesity. Dramestable, of discipline and not being caught up in other people's drama. Or ambulomatic, someone who at the first sign of sickness calls an ambulance as their primary care provider. Now, as you look at these, give your sense of which word is the best word that you would think would be used in common language, because they had 3 weeks to get these words out. Now, what you're saying is, Jeff, one of these words in this set is not a very polite word. And I let the students have it. I say, you to tell me, where is the line of taste drawn? Known product, known consumer, turn a transaction. The customers will let you know if this is a good word. Which word do you suppose was kicked out because it was politically insensitive? Superbesity. And you know, instead of me telling them from my view of 25 years as a creative, that's not going to work, what do I let them do? I let them go in the marketplace and come back and go, you know what, a lot of people say, you're really rude. You're not being very nice. And they said, I thought it was funny. And then they changed their point of view. Which word do you suppose was the winner in this set? Demi-achieving was really good because students have a real propensity of knowing which students get by with very little. They're very sensitive to their classmates, and they basically can use that language to say, hey, Johnny's a demi-achiever, and Johnny doesn't get it. That's how kids start to use the language. The other one was ambulomatic. Ambulomatic was really a well-received word. Okay, I know we're running out of time, but I want to give you a couple final things to leave with. Creativity is an outward expression or validation of your mental work that has utility. You all got to experience sense-making on time, not memory recall. You all had an aha moment. It wasn't serendipity. You discovered it. I believe very much in the power of discovery thinking in a structured way that allows you to use play of random information that you have to make sense of. And the reason this is so important is because the creative process is a search methodology. Incorrectly or correctly, and I try to make sure that the classes that I work with get proper techniques of how to search by giving them an inductive process that's input-based. Because search then leads to the very important skill of pursuit. If you can search, you can pursue. That's very important when we get students to go off and do something with their ideas. I'm a big fan of the concept before you can have sense-making, you have to have sense-giving. It was a topic that was in the entrepreneurship literature years ago. It doesn't get enough review, and I really wish we spend more time working on it. Dr. Ron Mitchell and I at Texas Tech University are working on ways to use sense-giving as a pre-scripting technique to elicit proto-entrepreneurial behavior. Because we find that the better your core idea is in terms of the feedback you get from each other in saying these words, the more cognitive fluidity you'll have the next time I do this again. You see, what's interesting is when you get feedback from other people like, yeah, our Bev emergency, that was a great word, man. You're going to walk all day long like, yeah, did you hear the new word I created? I'm all that. And so their intentions have changed. Their cognitive fluidity has improved. Their self-efficacy has improved. And guess what? They're fundamentally and measurably more creative. And we've proven this over and over and over again. Because sense-giving is very important to this process of intention. There is a responsibility when you invent something to do something with it. You see, that's what separates the people who have the same idea, the entrepreneur, and the tinkerer who never even leaves their garage with their prototype. And I want my students to get better at this. Because then we can have true sense-making, which then leads truly to effectuation. Finally, as we go, as I mentioned, there were 3 constructs that were very important in terms of the structural thinking, the left brain parts which we can measure: context, connection, and consequence. Well, there's a very important personal side to this that I want to remind that what Tom said yesterday was so important, is that entrepreneurship is literally the experience of being entrepreneurial. There is a very important personal capability that has to happen, and there are the emotional components of that. And the three of them are right here. You see, with a context, a student or an entrepreneur develops certainty. That's different than courage. That's different than swagger. Certainty is knowing that the next decision they make, they know where they're going and what they're going to do. A bev emergency is something that they can stand and say, now that I say it over and over and over again, the context, an emergency, a situation where I need an alcoholic beverage, stat, a bev emergency. It's funny, it's cute, it's lively, it has context, it gives them certainty. It then has a connection to something, a behavior, that gives them a confidence that that word addresses a need in a marketplace. You know, you're with your friends, we're having a bev emergency. Yeah, it's camaraderie. It develops the social interaction with the social circle. You see, and then the final part is because of the consequence, if I have a bev emergency and I mention it to you, you're more likely to buy me a drink. So now it has the ability of communicatability. And when we wonder why students get up to pitch and they can't pitch, is because they lack certainty. Why? Because they don't know whether the things that they searched for are real or they've drifted. They don't know where they're going. So, as you leave today, I'm more than happy to spend some time chatting with you. I'll be around all day. I want to ask you one final question. Can students be too creative? Yes, you can, and you were, because what you proved very clearly, that is, if you create something of value that you can't capture and transact with someone else in a conversation, then what you were greatly imaginative. And what we really need to do is to be entrepreneurial creative. Thank you so much for your time. I had a great time.